Hello everyone there, KYNOKEPHALOI here. Now, I suppose you're wondering what that name means. Well, to give a brief explanation, it means dog-headed man, and it originates from legends of men who had the heads of dogs. Now, the most famous of these legends is Saint Christopher, who is a saint who supposedly was brought to Christianity by the infant Jesus Christ himself, and somehow by making him carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, he transformed St. Christopher from what was some unknown visage, perhaps a giant or a dog-headed man, into a more human shape. And these legends are so widespread that there are many, many paintings of him with the head of a dog. Now, some people more recently have said that these are based on an error. He was descended from Canaanites, and some people claim that this was mistranslated as canine. And as you can see, it would technically make sense for that to be the case. After all, the Canaanites were considered, Jesus even calls a Canaanite a dog in the Bible. There's certainly a theme going on here. And it's actually quite common for saints to have no historical evidence for their existence. So that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't exist, but obviously in this case, it's a bit strange. It'd be rather hard for some people to swallow that there was a man with the head of a dog, because, well, we don't have any reason to believe such a thing is possible. Now, there are stories of dog-headed man in pre-Christian Greek writings, but people are suggesting that maybe those were mistaken accounts from people who saw baboons. So, the dog-headed ones, KYNOKEPHALOI, that's basically, so KYNOKEPHALOI, my name is basically a Latinization of that. Now, there are also accounts of dog-headed men in India, which is rather interesting. So you have dog-headed men in India, in Greece, in Libya. Okay, I'm not sure it actually says they were directly in Greece. The Greeks encountered them, but it's vague if they actually existed within Greece. And there are legends of the Dogman all around the world to this day. You have legends of them supposedly in Australia. I've heard stories. It's very common in America, and in England there are many, many legends, especially in medieval ages, of people being cursed and turned into dogs. Well, not dogs, but dogmen. And the interesting thing about this is that some accounts suggest that St. Christopher was a Nephilim, which is basically the giants of the pre-Noah, the Old Testament, essentially. And these giants were they were born from a human mother and a fallen angel as their father, which is rather interesting. As you can see, it draws ties to Anubis, but Anubis, you could argue, isn't quite the same, because I've noticed that there's nothing, it's always a dog or a wolf. I've never seen anything implying they were dogmen that looked like a jackal, which is rather interesting to think about. Now, interestingly enough, there is actually some evidence that this story may be true. For instance, we have here Saint Augustine. Let's see if I can just find it. Now, Saint Augustine came around about 200 years after Saint Christopher did. Now, I don't actually know if Saint Christopher died, because one could argue if he actually was a dogman, if he actually was some kind of giant or Nephilim, then well, how do you know that he has the same lifespan as a human? Assuming, of course, for the moment that he actually was. But let's just assume that he did die of old age and that he never met St. Augustine. What shall I say of the cynocephali, whose dog-like heads and barking, and notice he says barking here because baboons do not bark, proclaim them beasts rather than men. But we are not bound to believe all we hear of these monstrosities. But whoever is anywhere born a man, that is a rational mortal animal, no matter what unusual appearance he presents in colour, movement, sound, nor how peculiar he is in some power, part, quality of his nature, no Christian can doubt that he springs from that one protoplast, who can distinguish the common human nature from that which is peculiar and therefore wonderful. Now, St. Augustine of Hippo is rather widely renowned in Orthodox circles and in other Christian groups as far as I'm aware. So the fact that he stated clearly that the cynocephali were real is rather interesting, especially since we have many modern accounts of people finding something that doesn't quite look like anything you'd expect to be real. Now, the reason I'm uncovering this topic today is because I plan to go investigate the Dogman up in near Birmingham. There's a place called Chase Wood, and I'm going to go camping there and see if I can find the Dogman. The Chase. Let's see. Just give me a moment. Give me a moment. Okay. Here we go. Staffordshire. So, Chase in Staffordshire. Now, there have been many stories of Chase having wolves throughout quite a lot of history, actually. Essentially speaking, there's a town nearby that has a name that translates to wolf town, basically. And some have suggested that because there were wolves throughout England for a long period of its history, that it was named after the large number of wolves in this area. So it's rather interesting that many tales and accounts of the Dogmen come from here, because, well, one could argue that perhaps large wolves could be mistaken for dogmen, especially since wolves can get very large, especially if they're well fed. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that where are those accounts coming from now? Because there are still people claiming to have encountered or seen something that looks like the Dogman. Well, I'm planning on finding out. Catch me later. Cynocephali out.